Welcome to New Breakpoint. It's a digital event series designed for developers by developers. My name is Michelle Sandford and I am the Developer Engagement Lead for Australia, New Zealand and Asia. It's great to be back for 2025 and I am happy to share an exciting announcement. We are expanding New Breakpoint through Asia, which means we'll now be bringing you insights and stories from across the whole APAC region. We broadcast on the second Thursday of every month. And to give you a chance to deep dive into the latest advancements, if you join us on the release day, you can ask us questions that my guests and I will answer for you during the show, which we're going to be able to do today. So keep your keyboard handy. Today I am thrilled to welcome back Damian Brady, who is GitHub Staff Developer Advocate. He first graced New Breakpoint back in Season 1 and returned for Season 2, and it is fantastic to have him back with us with the latest from GitHub. Damo, you were just at GitHub Universe, which is absolutely on my bucket list. What can you tell me about it?
It's one of those rare opportunities where you get to see a lot of the engineering teams and product teams, as well as a lot of the community as well. So we had startup areas, and we had open source areas and maintainer sections, and obviously a lot of kind of activations, those cool little games and so on. There was this really cool game that you could play where you basically had to use LLMs to draw an image that matched the one that was on screen, which was super cool. But when I was there, I was responsible for a couple of things. The main one being the demos of the day one keynote, where we made a bunch of announcements. So I was behind the scenes. I wasn't on stage. A few people from my team and a few people from the product teams were on stage. And of course, Thomas, our CEO, was on stage. And a few guests from some partners of ours as well hit the stage. But I was backstage at one of the demo computers just watching, making sure things were okay. And then one of the live hosts as well. So if you're watching the stream, then you can go back and watch the Universe stream if you want. You'll see me and a bunch of colleagues kind of having fun, talking to people, showing you around. So yeah, a long couple of days, but so rewarding to be able to speak to everybody.
Those badges that they had, those were really cool as well.
Just a couple back here. So I've got this year and previous years as well. So yeah, super fun. And they're programmable as well, which is excellent. Yeah, really good. Badger 2040, I think is the chip that's behind it, but custom made and custom printed for us. Yeah.
Very cool. Before we go forward, I do just want to remind our audience to drop your questions in the chat and we will be answering those throughout for you. This episode is called Developer Choice. So first up, Damo, why don't you tell us about all the options on offer with multi-model Copilot?
Yeah, so we had quite a few exciting announcements at Universe, and we've kind of built on that since then. But one of the big announcements is the ability to choose which foundation model you're using behind the scenes to GitHub Copilot. So previously, we kind of made that decision for you. We had these really well, tightly trained models that knew how to write code really well, and they were based on generally the OpenAI set. So GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT 4. Depending on what you wanted to do. But we've given you a bit more choice now. And so we have O1 as an option, as well as GPT 4.0. We also have partnerships with a couple of other providers. So we have Gemini is one of the options that we've mentioned as well. So a partnership with Google. And we also have Claude is one of the other options as well. So if you go into Visual Studio Code now, and go to Copilot Chat, you'll be able to see there's a drop down of a number of different models. And that's kind of expanding all the time. We have a few more models in the background that I can't quite tell you about now, but there's a few others that are coming as well. So maybe the easiest way to do this would be to show you what they look like.
Yes, and I was gonna just say to everyone, if you only see one or two models, that's normal as well because they sort of roll them out across the developer population, and maybe you get one or two at the start, and then you'll start to see more of those models as they roll them out across everyone. But yeah, Demo, show us.
Okay, so I'm in Visual Studio Code now. And one thing you'll notice as well, if you haven't used GitHub Copilot for a little while, it used to be along the left, like one of the options was Copilot Chat here. But it's now moved, so it's up the top. So you can click Open Chat and it will open it on the right. And that's kind of the standard location now for Copilot. It's kind of nice you have your files on one side and your Copilot on the other side. But you can move it if you want. You can kind of I can't remember exactly how to do it. You can drag it around. There we go. We can put it wherever you want. But I like having it on the right. Right down the bottom, though, you'll see you can pick the model. And as Michelle said, I am likely to have more models than you do at the moment because I'm kind of flagged into a bunch of stuff. But you can see there's a few here. The ones you will almost certainly have are Claude 3.5 Sonnet and O1, so GPT-4o. You may have Gemini Pro, you may have Gemini 2.0 Flash. Now, this one is experimental, and then a few others as well. And these are expanding all the time. There's going to be new ones coming up, and the older ones might drop off as well. So what you can do, though, is use Copilot chat to ask questions of the code base and all sorts of stuff. Now, these have got a little bit smarter than they were. You used to kind of just be able to ask questions about the file you had open at the time. But now we've got a few other like little features that have come out. So if I ask something like, where on this or in this repo is the profile page, for example. And because you can see there's a lot of files here. If I'm not familiar with this code base, I'm not really going to be able to find that very well. So this is a great way of kind of onboarding somebody new to a project, or if you swap to a different code base and you're not familiar with it as well. We have these participants is what we call them, and workspace is one of those. So it's going to look through the entire workspace and say, it's finding out where in that workspace it's likely to find that information, collecting that, and then saying, well, it's an app profile page TSX. Very succinct answer. So app profile page TSX. And now it's described this code base for it. We've found what we need to find really easily. So this is GPT-4o. If I wanted a different, response to that same thing, I can change my model, and you'll see it's slightly different. It behaves a little bit differently, and to some extent, it's a little bit up to your preferences, what you want, what you prefer for different types of tasks. I find that 4o is quite good with the your participant, so it knows to pull in this workspace participant if I'm asking something about the entire code base. Whereas Claude hasn't done that. It said, well, here's how I would put in a profile page. So it's kind of missed in that case. O1 and O1 Mini are quite good at deeper thought. So if I wanted to ask questions about, well, what would be the best way to add this particular feature to my page? It's going to think a little bit more, and I use think in the very loosest term, obviously. It's going to think a bit more about what different changes might be made. There's kind of this chain of thought that's built into those large language models. So that is the case for chat. For the inline stuff, it's still just, what we have suggested is the right response. So, if I said function to get the user's name, it's username, for example. So it's using whatever model that we've decided behind the scenes. It's highly trained to be able to deal with the different programming languages you're using and the different platforms and so on. So yeah, that's one of the big announcements, partnerships with Anthropic and with Google, as well as OpenAI, to give you a bit more choice over the models that you can use.
Might those things be controlled by the organization as well, or not?
That is a great question. Yes, you can control them to some extent through the organization. So there are, I'm not completely up to date with what the levels of control are, but one of the advantages of using a GitHub Copilot Enterprise subscription is that you have a lot more policy control. So another example might be if a suggestion comes back from Copilot and it gives you code that appears in another code base somewhere, so it's matching a publicly accessible code base. You can block those entirely, or you can use another feature that we announced as well, which lets you know where else in GitHub it's found that code, so you can have a look at the licenses and so on and make decisions yourself. So all of that stuff at the for example, Copilot Enterprise license level is controllable across your organization. So you can have a lot more policy control over that kind of thing too. And I believe that goes for the model choice as well. You can restrict that, I believe.
I only see the GPT-4 and then the two O1 preview and the O1 mini at the moment. So I was just wondering if that was because I'm still early in the game, or whether Microsoft didn't want me to see the Google and Anthropic ones. They just wanted me to stick with our nice Azure OpenAI models.
It could be either, to be honest. It's most likely to be, honestly, that they either haven't rolled out to you, or yeah, in some cases, I suppose the organization can block that. But I'm using my GitHub account, which is not tied to my Microsoft account. So yeah, it could be either, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's probably just we're too early in the game for me, because yeah, Microsoft tends to let us have everything and see how much trouble we can get into, which can be a lot for me. I really like how I can find Copilot practically everywhere now. So if I'm just on github.com, I can use it for certain things there. I can use it on GitHub Mobile for certain things. Other things where I can't and I need to go a little bit deeper, I can just open code spaces directly from there, or I could do github.dev. There's just so many options. I don't even open Visual Studio Code anymore. Yeah, I really like that.
That's right. It's worth mentioning as well that github.dev, or a very lightweight one, won't have Copilot built in, as far as I would know, because there is no back-end server behind it. It's just all running in your browser. But the code space absolutely will. And you get a certain number of free hours of code spaces for free anyway. So you can always just open a repository using a code space and start using that.
Yes, that I use all the time now, which is probably why I use Visual Studio Code a lot less, because it's just super convenient. I'm mostly doing little changes directly in github.com, but then when I do want to get into a deeper conversation with Copilot, I'm often opening up code spaces, because then I can really get into it in a lot more detail. One of the things that I said to people about Copilot is that I use it for educational purposes. It's the thing that teaches me how to do what I need to do, and it helps me understand things. So like having that one-on-one conversation in Copilot chat is the main thing that I find most, that has really leapt me forward as a developer. What would you say is your favorite feature?
Look, I think I'm with you, actually. The explanation is quite good. There are a lot of new features that kind of come out. One of the ones that I really like is custom instructions, which is quite new. So if I did something like, highlighted this, let's combine those two. I'll jump back to GPT-4 and just highlight this code and say, can you explain the code? I should have said selected code, but there you go. Here's a selection. Here's an explanation, and it's quite verbose. Like, it gets a lot of information. It tells you a lot of stuff. Where really I just kind of wanted a sentence. So I could say, I don't know, and that should give me, a much more succinct. But maybe that's the way I want it to behave all the time. Or maybe it's the way I want it to behave for this specific project. So what you can do now is, under .github in a repository, have Copilot instructions. And then you can say something like, when responding a question, and if I save those instructions, and I will clear this and create a new chat, and then say, can I explain the code without saying one paragraph, you can see that it's included this Copilot instructions. And so it's given it to me in one paragraph rather than the really verbose thing. Now, this is really handy for like my own personal settings as well. But for an entire project, you may want something like, in this case, if we're creating for this project a reusable React component, we want to add a launch darkly flag to it. So launch darkly is a feature flag service, which is incredibly handy. But by including this in the project, it means every time you ask Copilot to create a React component, it will add this in because those custom instructions get sent up with your request. So this is one of my favorite features at the moment. This is obviously specific to the project, but I can also do stuff in my local settings as well. So just me, for my own personal settings, I can say, that's probably where something like this is more appropriate. So yeah, the explanations and also these custom instructions I find really, really handy.
That's really cool. I've got a workshop that the advocates wrote on prompt engineering that I've been teaching recently, and I love it. I love talking about prompt engineering. I love all of there's some really good Microsoft Learn pathways around prompt engineering, but that in the Copilot instructions, that is prompt engineering for Copilot that each user can do to make their Copilot more customized to them, right?
Exactly. It's almost like a meta prompt, like a thing that always gets included when you're talking to Copilot chat. Yeah, it can be really, really handy.
I think that's a great thing, because when you often see people talking about Copilot and they've just used it initially, they might say, "Oh, I didn't like it," or it did this thing. Whereas being able to specifically make it how you would like it by telling it the things that you like I always want my comments to be verbose. And I always want it to do that into my code. So when it is giving me code samples or code suggestions that I might like to use, I would like a comment above that to remind me, because if I had to ask it for help, the chances are I won't remember why it's written the code in that way, and so I would like that in there. And I could just put that in those instructions, right, that I always want the comments in.
Exactly. Yes, you definitely could. Yeah, and for the project itself or for your own custom settings. Yeah.
Oh yes, because that's perfect, because not everyone wants it as verbose as me. So for things that I'm working on with my team, I want it to be less, but when it's all my private stuff, then definitely I want it to be more.
Yeah, more verbose. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Is there any other cool things you want to show us about Copilot before we move on to the next thing?
Yeah, definitely. One thing which I kind of touched on briefly is this model picker here is not just in chat. We've also got a new feature called Copilot Edits. Now this it takes Copilot a little bit further, where it lets you edit a bunch of different things at the same time. So let's just jump to the app just so I can show you what I'm talking about. This is our Copilot Airways app. This is the profile page with one of our users here, and there's the kind of recent points activity. And if we wanted a graph underneath this, because it's good to visualize this kind of thing, then generally we'd have to change the UI. We might want to have a reusable React component to display that graph. We might need to change some of the data retrieval stuff. We might want to put tests in there as well. And so we've got a whole bunch of these different changes that we want to include in this change. So rather than doing them individually in each file, Copilot Edits lets us do that in one here. Just before I start, I'm just going to say, is there anywhere else in this repo that draws a line graph? Because we want it to be consistent, right? We want to make it look like the rest of the application. It's found a ton of references that are relevant, and it says, yeah, look, there's one in this on-time line chart, and shows you what it looks like. I'm just going to make that assumption that that's going to be fine. Because one of the things you can do is say, add a reusable line chart to display, what is a points activity. Oops. On the profile page below the table. Make it look and behave like and then if you hit hash, that gives you the ability to reference something else in your code base. In this case, I'm just going to say on time line chart. And so that's where I'm specifically giving it some context to say, go and look there to see how I want you to build this thing. And then what else? It's already got the reference for the page that we're on, so I don't need to do that. And what else?
Yeah, you can use that little paperclip thing if you wanted to add any other pages.
That's true, yeah. So that lets you attach the context as well, or you can do Control/ by the look of it in Windows.
Well, when you asked your question initially, it looked across the whole workspace without you even saying that. But that's one of the things that you could say, right? Across the workspace, across the file, across there's a few choices.
Yeah, so I can say, the selection, the editor that's open now. I can pick symbols for specific languages too. So it's a little bit deeper than just a file or so on. I could say, the points activity service symbol here, like the constant that I've got. Obviously, just for some languages, that's going to work. I can even reference like the VS Code API if I wanted to say, how do I do this in Visual Studio Code? But in this case, I'm just going to say, also write tests. So we've given it some really specific instructions, and normally, we'd have to go to each of these files and make those changes. In this case, it's creating a solution, and it's making changes to a bunch of different files. So you can see up here, it's working on that points activity line chart, which is a brand new file that it's created. And it's written some tests for that file as well. So we've got a few of these changes, and let's change the page TSX that we're on at the moment. You can see it rewriting it as we watch. And it's pulled in this activity line chart. So it's done. We can look at those 3 files individually to see what they've all done. But what I'm going to do instead is click on this little view all edits over on the right, and it will show me all of these in one hit. So we've got our points activity chart. You can see as well that it's added this launch darkly service based on our custom instructions because it's creating a reusable component. And it's, that looks fine to me. It's got tests in there as well. They look great. It's updated the profile page to pull in that line chart and then grab the monthly data and all sorts of stuff like that. So that looks all great. I'm going to save all of these, and I'm going to accept all of those edits. Now, if we're lucky, and I jump back over to this page, we can see there's our points activity over time. So it's made changes to a bunch of files to build in this functionality in one hit. So again, in this case, I was using Claude in this case, but I could have used GPT-4o or o1 or any of the other ones that you have access to too. So yeah, really powerful for doing some of that work as well. So that's Copilot edits, which you should have access to if you have Copilot now.
Yeah, and I was gonna say that, like, that whole accept it in from your chat window is like, that's quite a new thing as well, because previously in your chat window it would provide you with code, but then you had to sort of click on the little thing to say insert at cursor, or say copy the code and then paste it.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's giving you the option to accept it in window, like it was doing when you were doing inline edits before, but now it's in both places, which is really cool. I think the other thing I would point out is that a lot of people who are not developers will look at that and say, oh, it just does it all for you when you don't need to understand anything in order to use it, and it'll be a way for us to get rid of all the developers. But that's really not true, because what you did there, that did work right away, but anyone who is a developer knows that often when you make changes to stuff, it doesn't work right away. And so if you don't understand the changes that it's making, you can't just click on stuff and say yes, go. And that's probably where I would use Copilot Chat to go a little bit deeper, and I would say, can you explain all of those changes to me? Can you walk me through it step by step so I understand it? And if there's stuff that I don't understand why it's in there, so for example, if I didn't know about those instructions, I might ask it, why is it adding all of this launch darkly stuff? why, when I hadn't thought about that or I didn't know about that. And then it could explain that to me at that point as well so that I could understand, which I think is a really good way to help junior developers come along the journey with the rest of the team that might be more senior without leaving them behind. But it's not going to replace them, and it's not going to replace the senior devs either.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's worth stressing that this is clearly a demo that I've done a few times before. And so I skipped over this looks fine. I wouldn't do that. I would look very much at what the code is being produced, and analyze whether it's actually doing what you want it to do. But yeah, demoware, I guess, is what I was doing.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was definitely trying to get it to teach me stuff about GitHub Actions this weekend, and I haven't really I've used them a little bit before, but I haven't really created any of my own. And so I was struggling with that because Copilot will suggest stuff. But if you don't understand it, you really can't just say yes, because it's going to have put everything in there. And when you are doing an action, you don't want all of the things in there. You want to pick and choose the things that will make your flow run in the most effective way. So you need to understand what's going on. You need to make active choices, and that might involve a lot of conversations with Copilot so that you can understand it and so that you can get it working in a way that is correct. And I just think it's so useful and such a big time saver, and it means I don't have to get someone to teach me that stuff directly, and I don't have to try and just learn it from Microsoft Learn, which is good, but I like to talk things through. So I love it.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that there are a few other places that Copilot shows up, and I'm conscious of time, and I want to kind of flick through some of those, because these are other areas where we've started seeing Copilot show up. And one area is in security. So one of the things that we've been trying to do for a while is to build security into that developer workflow. So it's not a case of, hey, I wrote some code, let's send it to the QA team or to the security experts and say, is this code secure? And so we've done a couple of things to kind of give you at least a first step into Copilot helping you out with those things. So as an example, GitHub Copilot can participate in pull requests now. So you can see over in the reviewers section, I might just zoom in a tiny bit. You can request a review from GitHub Copilot, which gives Copilot access to the changes that you've made, and it can make suggestions about what you should change. Now, obviously, this doesn't replace a human reviewer, but it's a good kind of first step to see, at least initially, before you bother somebody else on your team, these are the things you might want to change immediately. But as well as that, we have GitHub Advanced Security, which now uses Copilot to not just identify vulnerabilities, but to suggest fixes for them as well. So you can see the GitHub Advanced Security bot here has found some potential problems. Now, this is obviously a little bit old, but they're still relevant problems. And you can see that it's got some comments like this may have some, we're just passing a parameter straight into a SQL query, which is not great. There's also, it's noticed some rate limiting issues there as well. Now, it's given a bunch of suggestions and their fixes. If I go all the way to the bottom, you can see, look, here are some of the fixes that are suggested. It's controlled the URL that you can pass in. It's rate limited the requests as well to that server. So, it's given not just a suggestion of what to change, but it's given a description of why it thinks that needs to change. So this is part of Copilot Autofix, which is kind of identifies the issue and then tries to suggest fixes. Now, I could, if I wanted to, just commit that suggestion straight away and say, yeah, I like what you've done there. Or I can edit the suggestion itself, or I can open it in a workspace. And this is really handy. This is a kind of in-browser way of kind of interacting. So it's an editor inside the browser, but it also has these requests. So I can just say, apply these changes, and it will make the changes to that file. And if I wanted to change it myself, I have full control over it as well. I can, discard those changes. Let's just reset them. And I can come back to see any other suggestions. So there was an outdated one. When we ran it again, it found some new things. And if there's suggestions from other people in your team for Copilot, you can dig into those as well and have a look at what those suggestions look like. So this is all inside Visual Studio. All inside the browser, inside github.com. And I can also, ask questions of Copilot in the browser as well. So I don't have to jump out to Visual Studio Code to talk to GitHub Copilot. And it has context of what I'm looking at right now. So if I ask what commits are in the PR, it's got these 4 commits, and you can see what's in them, drill into them if you want to as well.
I always say that no one really understands Git, but what I mean by that is, of course, nobody remembers all of the commands that you need to do or the order that you need to do them in. And I've been using it just like that to tell me what is the order that I need to do things in and what are the Git commands that I need to do in order to do it. And I had a kind of I wanted to create a bunch of files in advance and put them on another branch, and then commit one of those files each day to main. And it told me how to do that, cherry picking each of the commits from the other branch and pushing them to main and all of that. And I just think it's such a huge time saver, rather than having to look at documentation and try and figure out how does this work in the context of what I need to do. You can just ask it and then it will tell you those things.
One of the great things as well is that it has the context, and it can be given the context of your actual application and your repository. But you can also say, look up a knowledge base. So we have, for example, I've got a few knowledge bases that we have internally. I'm not going to dig into those too much, but I can also say something like, give me all of the Python repos in my org and use those as context. Or explicitly say, looking at this particular repository, for example, that travel app we were looking at, I can ask questions of that repository. So I have the context not just of, understanding how code works, but also, the repository as well. So that same kind of thing, do I have tests for the profile page? And because I'm looking specifically at that repository, that's what it's looking at. It has the context of exactly what I'm trying to do. It gives you a way of talking to your code base, really, which is quite powerful.
I think that's one of the things that a lot of big organizations, well, not even big, like all organizations want. They don't want new or junior devs coming in and writing code that, while it might be legitimately good code, it is out of alignment with the stuff that the rest of the organization is writing, and it's not according to those standards. Whereas here you can absolutely get it to look at all of that, reference all of that, and the guidance that it gives them will be aligned to what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's specific to your scenario, to your organization, rather than, for example, ChatGPT is fantastic at solving a lot of these problems, but it doesn't have that context of what you want in your organization and your application.
Yeah, and of course, you don't really want to share your stuff with ChatGPT.
Yes.
GitHub Copilot is keeping it nice and private in your organization, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
You did mention Workspace just briefly there, but it is quite a big, impressive thing in its own right. Can you show us a little bit more about that? I was trying to use that as well over the holidays, and it's quite amazing how much there is in there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll show you an example. Here's the travel guide page that we have on our application. I'm just waiting for that to load. We have a travel guide which kind of looks through different cities in the US and gives you suggestions about, where you should go. So, for example, New York, it's given a description and some highlights. But when you go to the admin page, where you can change and add new cities, it'd be nice to kind of add an image to that as well. So we have an issue in our repo, add an image upload to the travel admin guide page, or travel guide admin. And we've even got, a screenshot of the page, and some descriptions and conversations and so on about what's going on. I can open this in a workspace, and this kind of gets me started using Copilot to help me build this feature. We'll sign into Workspace, and it'll look at the issue itself, but also its knowledge of the code base. So it's brainstorming at the moment and saying, look, does it have an image upload file? Here's the current behavior. Here's a proposed solution. And it breaks it down for me. It kind of helps me decide how to implement this. And then it will help me implement it too. So it's currently reading through the proposal, and it's saying, let's do these things. Here's the proposed solution. Now I can ask more questions. I can continue with this brainstorming and ask it for additional information, like what options do I have? Right. And yeah, if I spell it incorrectly, that's fine. And so it becomes more of an ideation tool. So rather than just filling in the details of what we want, it helps me kind of brainstorm. So in this case, we've got a basic file input, drag and drop, image preview. I like this idea, and so I'm going to add that to the task. And you can see down here, basic file input, as well as the how do I solve this issue from the start. And so it's going to analyze this, and it's going to make some suggestions about what I should change. Now, once it's done this, I can generate a plan for going ahead. Let's just wait until it's done this. And I can generate a plan, and it will go through what it thinks I need to change to implement those changes. So the files I want to change and how they want to change. And it's doing this much the same way as that the Copilot edits, where it's looking across the repository for these are the files that need to change. And then when I want to actually make those changes, I can scroll down and say implement. Now this will take a minute because I forgot to cache this before I started, but I'll just let you see, as it's building them, you can see it's actually writing the code as we go. And when it's done, I can also do things like run a build or run tests, or run the application. I even get a terminal if I want to do that as well. So there is compute backing this as well. So I can run my tests and I can run my my builds and so on. So if I wanted to run those tests, go and it's running, I can stop the execution. But then when it finishes, I can see whether the test succeeded and failed. When it's made all those changes, the changes to the files, I can create a pull request right from here too. So my tests all passed, which looks great. And if I create a pull request, I can submit that as a PR directly to my repository based on the changes that it's made. Now, obviously, I'd spend a bit more time in here and revise it and so on, but I just wanted to show you what that looks like in the context of Workspace. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, all of the Copilot components have that natural language interface, which makes it so much easier to talk to it and understand what it's doing and what you're doing together. Whereas previously, before we had Copilots, we were just trying to write code, and the smallest typo would be a blocker in moving forward, whereas now you can have that conversation and it will bring those things through. But you can collaborate with the rest of your team as well, right, in here.
You can, yeah. So you can actually share this workspace with the rest of your team. And what that means is they can open the workspace where you are at the moment. And if they want to make further changes, it's kind of branches off so that they can make their changes on top of what you've already done as well. So as well as just creating a pull request where people can continue that work, you can share a workspace with the rest of your team and keep going from there.
Yeah, I suppose that's depending on how big it was. So if it's initially at the start of the project, you might want to share it with everyone, and so that they can collaborate on what else they'd like to see in there. But if you were just moving forward with one feature like you're doing, then yeah, maybe you just go straight to the pull request, and they could, by the review process, add their comments in there and make any recommendations for changes. Damo, thank you for taking the time to come on the show again and giving us a taste of all the exciting announcements from GitHub Universe and everything else that has been out since then. It is the next best thing to being there. Before we finish, is there anything else that you want to leave us with as like one final tip?
I'm going to do a tiny little sneak preview. My best advice is to look at the GitHub Universe keynote. Thomas, our CEO, demonstrates GitHub Spark. This is a bit more of a non-programmer entry into writing like micro apps. So it allows you to describe a little micro app that you might want, and then it will build it for you. And you don't need to touch the code generally at all. So I would highly recommend. So for example, this is one that was built purely based on a description, a text-based description. But yeah, have a look at the Universe keynote, and right at the end, Thomas Domke gives a pretty good example of that. But that's GitHub Spark. Otherwise, check out GitHub Copilot. There is a free version of it now, which was released pretty recently as well. So you can access it for free. You don't need to pay us anymore. And there are token limits and so on, but it's enough to really get you started and be useful day to day.
Yeah. A little bit each day, and if they run out of tokens, they can do it again tomorrow, and it'll be fine.
That's right.
Thank you, Damo. Thanks for coming on.
Nice. Thanks for having me.
Everyone else, thank you for staying with us. You can find all the resources for this episode on our GitHub repo, of course. We've been answering your questions online, and we're going to hang around for another 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have any last questions, get those in now. Thank you all for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.